Lykara woke to the cold bite of metal against her emerald green skin. Her wrists were bound, the chains rattling faintly as she shifted. The floor beneath her was hard, unforgiving, and frigid, like frozen stone. The faint hum of machinery echoed around her, vibrating through the floor. Wherever she was, it wasn't her ship. The alien warrior sat up, her breathing sharp and uneven as fragmented memories surged back. The battle, the humans, her ship's hull torn apart by their crude, yet devastating weapons. She had fought ferociously, claws slashing, voice roaring. But they had been too many, too relentless. And then the darkness came. A gas had stolen her strength, her fire. Now she was here. Humans. The thought alone filled her chest with fury and dread. Monsters. Her people had called them savages, whispered of their brutality in the dark halls of her world. Humans did not take prisoners for honor or strategy. They took them for sport. Lykara clenched her fists, her chains jangling softly. If this was her end, she would face it with pride. She was a warrior of the Zanari. She was not weak. She was not afraid. A sound made her freeze. Footsteps, deliberate and measured, drawing closer. Her sharp eyes fixed on the door as it hissed open. Blinding light poured in for a moment before a figure stepped into view. It was a human. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and clad in a dark uniform with edges so sharp it seemed almost ceremonial. His face was calm, unnervingly calm, as though creatures like her were nothing new to him. Lykara bared her teeth, her sharp canines glinting in the light. "Come closer, human," she hissed in her native Zanari tongue. "Let's see if your blood flows as easily as the others." To her surprise, the human didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head, his expression neutral. Then in perfect Zanari, he replied, "You are awake." Her breath caught. A human speaking her language? "You took me from my ship," she snarled, tugging at her chains. "Why haven't you killed me yet? Isn't that what you humans do? Destroy and revel in it?" The human ignored her sharp words. Instead, he crouched a safe distance away and set a small metal tray on the floor. On it were water, clear and pure, and a portion of food. Lykara's gaze flickered between the tray and his face. Was this some sort of trick? "I do not wish to harm you," he said, his voice steady and calm. "You are our prisoner, yes, but I am not your enemy." She laughed bitterly. "Do you think I'm a fool? I know you're kind. Humans lie. Humans torture. You cannot hide what you are." His eyes remained steady, and for the first time, she noticed something unusual in his expression. It wasn't hatred, nor was it anger or pity. It was something else. "I will not force you to eat," he said, rising to his feet. "But you need your strength." "For what?" she spat. "So you can break me properly? So you can carve your mark into my skin and laugh at my screams?" The human sighed softly, as though weary. "You think I'm a monster," he said, "but you are wrong." Lykara opened her mouth to argue, but his tone stopped her. He didn't sound smug or cruel. He sounded tired. "You can think what you like," he said, turning to leave. "The food and water are there. Use them or don't. It's your choice." The door hissed shut behind him, leaving her alone. She stared at the tray for a long time. The water was so clean. The food smelled edible. Her stomach growled, but she shoved the hunger down, telling herself it was a trap. Yet doubt began to creep in. That human, he didn't act like the stories. He didn't yell, didn't threaten, didn't look at her as though she were a beast to tame. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "What game are you playing, human?" Her eyes drifted back to the tray. She told herself it was poisoned, and yet her stomach growled again. Slowly, cautiously, she reached for the cup of water. It was cold, real. No tricks. The days blurred together. Or perhaps they weren't days at all. Time was meaningless in the cold, dim room. The human, who called himself Commander Alric, returned regularly, always with food, always with water, and always with that same maddening calm. At first, she ignored him, refusing to eat or drink while he was present. But her body betrayed her hunger, and soon she gave in, silently hating herself for it. One visit, he brought something new, a simple gray blanket. "What is this?" she demanded, eyeing it suspiciously. "A blanket," Alric replied matter-of-factly. Do you mock me? No, he set it down and stood. You're cold. This will help. She glared at him. Do you expect me to thank you? I won't. I don't need your thanks, he said, turning toward the door. The moment he left, she kicked the blanket aside. Stupid human. Did he think she'd feel gratitude for such a trivial thing? Yet as the cold bit into her skin once more, she found herself reaching for it. When she wrapped it around herself, it smelled sharp and clean, like him. The thought unsettled her more than the cold ever had. The visits continued. Sometimes he spoke, sometimes he sat in silence. Slowly, despite herself, she began to talk. Why don't you hate me? She demanded one day, her voice sharp and suspicious. I don't hate you, he replied simply. Liar, she snapped. I've seen your kind burn my people's homes, slaughter our soldiers. You expect me to believe you're any different? Alric's expression shifted, just briefly. A flicker of pain crossed his face, so quick she almost missed it. You're not wrong, he said softly. Humans have done terrible things. Just as your kind has. She stiffened, anger rising in her chest. We fight because you invaded us. And we fight because we fear you, he said. Do you really think we're so different? The question struck her like a blow. She opened her mouth to retort, but found no words. Instead, she turned away, fists clenched. Don't speak to me as though you understand me, she growled. I'm not here to fight you, he said quietly. I'm here to show you something greater than war. There is nothing greater than war, she spat. It's all we know. Then maybe it's time that changed. Silence filled the room. For the first time, Lykara didn't feel hatred. She felt something far more dangerous, uncertainty. Lykara sat cross-legged on the cold floor, the gray blanket draped loosely over her shoulders. She could no longer tell how long she had been in the room. Days? Weeks? The passage of time felt meaningless in this sterile cage. Yet the visits from Commander Alric had become a strange constant. At first, she had dreaded his presence, anticipating cruelty. Then she resented it, thinking it a trick. Now, she simply didn't know what to think. Today, he entered without food or water. His hands were empty, and his expression was calm, as always. But something about the way he held himself seemed different. What is it now, Alric? She demanded, her voice carrying more weariness than venom. Come to tell me more about how humans are misunderstood saints? His lips quirked, almost imperceptibly. Was that amusement? No, he replied. I came to ask you something. Lykara leaned back against the wall, crossing her arms. Ask me? What could you possibly want to know from me? He crouched down, sitting on the small stool he often brought with him. What do you want, Lykara? The question caught her off guard. She stiffened, narrowing her piercing amber eyes. What kind of game is this? No game, Alric said simply. I've told you what I want. For you to live, for you to understand. But what do you want? She scoffed, shaking her head. I want freedom. I want to return to my people. And I want to see your world burn for what you've done to mine. He didn't flinch, didn't react to her venom. Instead, he gave her a small nod. Fair enough. But what about beyond that? Beyond that, she echoed, incredulous. What else is there? Alric leaned forward slightly, his dark eyes steady on hers. What kind of life do you want when the war ends? Lykara's jaw tightened. War doesn't end, human. It's all there is. Even if we win, even if we crush you, there will always be another enemy. That's what you've been taught, Alric said quietly. But do you believe it? The question hit her like a blow. She opened her mouth to reply, but no words came. Did she believe it? Could she imagine a life without war? A life where she wasn't defined by battles and bloodshed? Her silence seemed to answer for her. Alric leaned back, resting his hands on his knees. I fought in this war because I believed it was necessary. I was told your people were monsters, that you would never stop until humanity was wiped out. And maybe some of that is true. Maybe some of it isn't. He paused, his gaze softening. But I know one thing for certain. There's more to life than this. Lykara stared at him, her mind swirling with conflicting emotions. She wanted to dismiss his words, to laugh at his naive idealism. But a small part of her, a part she didn't want to acknowledge, felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Curiosity. "You think you know better than my people?" she asked, her tone sharp but lacking its usual bite. "I don't claim to know better," he replied. "But I know what I've seen. War consumes everything. It eats away at who you are until all that's left is a shell. I don't want that for you." She clenched her fists, her chains rattling softly. "You don't know me. You don't get to decide what I become." "You're right," he said. "That's your choice. But you deserve to make it with all the pieces, not just the ones war has handed you." The room fell silent, the weight of his words pressing down on her. She hated the way they made her feel, the way they made her question things she had always believed to be true. Finally, she broke the silence. "You talk as if peace is something you can just reach out and take. It doesn't work that way, Alric. Not for your people. Not for mine. Maybe not," he admitted. "But someone has to try." She shook her head, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "You're a fool?" "Maybe," he said with a faint smile. "But I'd rather be a fool than a monster." Before she could reply, he stood and walked to the door. "Wait," she called after him, surprising herself. He paused, glancing back over his shoulder. "Why do you care?" she asked, her voice quieter now, almost vulnerable. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then he said, "Because someone cared about me when I didn't think I deserved it." The door hissed open, and he stepped through, leaving her alone once more. Lykara sat there, staring at the empty space where he had been. His words echoed in her mind, refusing to be silenced. For the first time, she wondered if there was more to life than the war she had been born into. And for the first time, she wasn't sure she wanted to find the answer alone. Lykara paced the cold, confined space of her cell, her chains dragging faintly against the floor. She hated how much her body ached for movement, for the freedom to stretch and breathe without the weight of her restraints. But more than that, she hated how her mind had begun to race, how he had gotten into her head. Alric's words replayed like an irritating echo she couldn't shake. "You deserve to make your choice with all the pieces, not just the ones war has handed you." What choice? There was no choice. There never had been. Her people, the Nasiri, were warriors, born to fight. It was their pride, their legacy. Peace wasn't something they sought. It was something they won, clawing it from the hands of those who dared stand against them. It was the way of her ancestors, the way of her clan. And yet, when Alric looked at her with those dark, tired eyes, she felt something crack. A soft hiss drew her attention to the door. It slid open, and there he was again, Commander Alric, the strange human who defied every expectation she'd had of his kind. This time, he wasn't alone. A smaller human followed behind him, a woman, with sharp features and a datapad tucked under one arm. She stood nervously behind Alric, as though hesitant to step too far into the room. "What's this?" Lykara demanded, her voice sharp and challenging. "You've brought an audience to witness your so-called diplomacy?" Alric glanced back at the woman and gestured for her to stay by the door. "No audience," he said calmly. "This is Dr. Rivera. She's here to check your injuries." Lykara blinked, caught off guard. "Injuries? You took a blast to the shoulder during your capture," Alric explained, motioning to her right arm. "You've been favoring it. I thought it best to have it looked at." "I don't need your care," she snapped, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. Rivera hesitated, glancing nervously at Alric. He gave her a reassuring nod. "Doctor, it's fine. Let her decide." The woman gave Lykara a weak smile. "I won't force anything on you. But infection is a risk. And if it spreads—" I said no. Lykara's tone brooked no argument, but her own curiosity betrayed her. Humans offering care instead of pain? Was this another trick? Alric crouched down, sitting on his usual stool a few paces from her. His hands rested loosely on his knees, his movements slow and deliberate, as though he were trying not to startle her. "You don't trust us?" "I get that," he said, "but the offer stands. If you change your mind, Rivera will come back." Lykara glared at him. "Why bother? You don't care about me, human. This is just another way to toy with me. You want me weak and grateful." Alric didn't flinch at her accusation. Instead, he gave her that infuriatingly steady look. "Gratitude isn't what I want. I want you to be well. Why? She growled. Because I don't want to see you die, he said, his voice quiet but firm. The words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Lykara felt her chest tighten, her anger warring with something deeper, something more fragile. No one, Nasiri or otherwise, had spoken to her like this before. Not without an agenda. Rivera shifted uncomfortably, clearly picking up on the tension. Commander, perhaps I should wait outside. No, Lykara's voice cut through the air, surprising even herself. Stay? The doctor froze mid-step, her eyes widening slightly. Alric tilted his head, watching Lykara carefully. You want to help me? Lykara said, her tone sharp. Then answer question, human. Ask. Alric replied evenly. She leaned forward, her amber eyes burning into his. What do you want from me? He didn't look away, didn't hesitate. I want you to see that this war doesn't have to define you, that you're more than the battles you've fought. Her laughter was bitter, filled with disbelief. You think words will change me? You think I'll suddenly see your side of things because you sit there and pretend to care? No, he said simply. I don't expect you to believe me. Not yet. But I'm not giving up on you, Lykara. She froze at the sound of her name on his lips. He rarely used it, and when he did, it felt different. Personal. I know you hate me, Alric continued, and I don't blame you for it. But if there's even a small part of you that wants something beyond this war, then I'll be here. I'll wait. Silence filled the room once again. Rivera looked as though she wanted to be anywhere else, but Alric remained calm, his gaze unwavering. Lykara clenched her fists, her chains rattling softly. Leave, she muttered. Alric didn't move. Lykara, I said leave, she shouted, her voice cracking. For a moment, he looked like he might argue. But then he stood, motioning for Rivera to follow him. Before stepping out, he turned back to her. I'll check on you tomorrow, he said quietly. The offer still stands. The door hissed shut, and Lykara was alone once more. She sat there for what felt like hours, her mind a storm of conflicting thoughts. She hated him for his calm, for his patience, for the way he made her question everything she thought she knew. And yet she couldn't deny the small, flickering ember of doubt that had taken root in her chest. What if he wasn't lying? What if humans weren't the monsters she had always believed them to be? The thought was terrifying, because if it was true, then what did that make her? For the first time since her capture, Lykara felt something she couldn't name, something that made her chest ache and her eyes sting. For the first time, she wasn't sure if she wanted to fight it. Lykara woke to the faint hum of the ship's engines, the cold bite of the metal floor beneath her a familiar discomfort. But something had changed. She felt it before she could name it, like a shift in the air she couldn't explain. She had dreamt of Alric, not of his words or his strange calm, but of his face, the way his dark eyes softened when he spoke to her, the weariness that clung to him like a shadow. She hated that she'd noticed these things, hated even more that they lingered in her thoughts like an unanswered question. The hiss of the door snapped her from her thoughts. Instinctively, she straightened, her chains clinking softly as her amber eyes narrowed at the figure entering the room. It was him again. Of course. Alric stepped inside, carrying another tray, water, food, and something else this time. A small, rectangular object wrapped in a cloth. She scowled. More tricks? He set the tray down a safe distance from her and sat on the stool as always, his movements slow and deliberate. No tricks, he said simply. Lykara's eyes flicked to the object wrapped in cloth. What is that? A book, Alric replied, unwrapping it carefully. The cover was worn but intact, the pages thick and yellowed with age. She scoffed. A book? Do you think I'll fall for such nonsense? What could I possibly want with your human relics? His lips twitched in the faintest hint of a smile. It's not human. That caught her off guard. What? This, he said, holding it up so she could see the strange, flowing script on the cover, is from your people. Found in the ruins of a Nasiri outpost we salvaged years ago. I thought you might recognize it. Her breath caught in her throat. She leaned forward without meaning to, her chains rattling as her sharp eyes scanned the markings. It was Nasiri, though the dialect was old, far older than anything she had seen in her lifetime. "Why do you have this?" she demanded, her voice low and dangerous. Alric met her gaze evenly. "It was abandoned, left behind after one of your skirmishes with the Volthak. We kept it, studied it, but no human alive can read it. Not completely. And you bring it to me now? Why? To mock me? To remind you?" he said quietly. Her eyes narrowed. "Of what?" He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. "Of who you are. Of who your people were before this war defined you." Lykara's chest tightened, her fists clenching in her lap. She wanted to lash out, to tell him he didn't know anything about her or her people. But the book, the symbols etched into its cover, stirred something in her, something she couldn't ignore. "You think this will make me forget what you've done?" she hissed. "No," he said. "I think it will help you remember what you've lost." Silence fell between them, heavy and unyielding. Lykara stared at the book, her mind a whirlwind of anger and confusion. Finally, she spoke. "You don't understand, human. You can't. My people fight because we must. We fight because the galaxy demands it." Alric's expression softened, but his gaze remained steady. "And what has it cost you?" The question hit her like a blow. She opened her mouth to retort, but no words came. Instead, memories flooded her mind. Her clanmates lost in battle, the hollow victories that left nothing but ashes in their wake. "What choice do we have?" she said finally, her voice quieter now. "There's always a choice," Alric replied, "even if it's the harder path." Her laugh was bitter. "Easy for you to say. You're the victor. You hold the chains. I'm not here to keep you in chains, Lykara." "Then what are you here for?" she snapped, her anger flaring once more. "To show you that there's more to this galaxy than war." She stared at him, her amber eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. She found none. "You're a fool," she muttered, leaning back against the wall. "Maybe," Alric said, standing slowly. "But I'd rather be a fool who believes in something than a soldier who believes in nothing." He left the book on the tray and turned toward the door. "It's yours now," he said over his shoulder. "Do with it what you will." The door slid shut behind him, leaving her alone once again. For a long time, Lykara didn't move. She stared at the book, its worn cover an ancient script calling to her like a distant voice she couldn't quite hear. Finally, she reached out, her fingers brushing against the rough surface. It felt familiar, like a piece of home she hadn't realized she'd lost. Slowly, carefully, she opened it. The pages were filled with stories, legends of her people's past, tales of bravery and honor, but also of peace and unity. She read until her eyes burned, until the words blurred together. When she finally set the book down, her mind was buzzing with questions she couldn't answer. Maybe Alric was right. Maybe there was more to this galaxy than war. But if that was true, then who was she without it? The days stretched on. Alric kept coming back, always calm, always deliberate, always carrying the same quiet kindness that both infuriated and unsettled her. The book became her constant companion, its pages a window into a forgotten part of herself. It stirred something she hadn't felt in years, a longing for more than bloodshed, more than survival. But with every new page, every conversation, Lykara felt the weight of an unspoken question growing heavier. What would she do with this newfound understanding? Today, when the door hissed open, she didn't look up immediately. Her eyes remained on the book, her fingers tracing the ancient script on the page. "You've been reading," Alric observed as he set down the usual tray. "I have," she said, her tone guarded. He sat across from her, as he always did, and waited. It was a familiar dance now, him waiting for her to speak, her debating whether or not to let him in. Finally, she closed the book and met his gaze. "Why do you keep coming here?" "To show you there's another way," he said, his voice steady. "And if I refuse to see it?" Alric's expression softened, but he didn't look away. "Then that's your choice. But you deserve the chance to decide for yourself. Not because of the chains or the war or what others expect of you." She studied him, searching for any sign of deception, but found none. His sincerity was maddening. You speak of choices as though they're simple, she said bitterly. As though I can simply walk away from what I am. You're not just a soldier, Lykara, Alric said quietly. You're more than that. You've always been more than that. The word struck a nerve, but she shoved the emotion down. You think your words will erase what's been done? My people are gone, scattered and broken because of you. Because of war, Alric corrected gently. Not because of me. Not because of you. War takes everything and leaves nothing behind. But it doesn't have to define us. She looked away, her jaw tightening. You don't know what it's like to lose everything. I do, he said softly. Her gaze snapped back to him, and for the first time, she saw something raw in his expression, a shadow of pain he usually kept hidden. What did you lose? She asked, the words escaping before she could stop them. He hesitated, his hands resting on his knees. My family, my world. The admission was like a blow. She had always seen him as the enemy, the embodiment of everything her people hated. But now he was just a man carrying his own scars. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Alric stood, his movements slow and deliberate. This will be my last visit, he said, his voice quiet. Lykara's chest tightened, though she didn't understand why. Why? Because the choice is yours now, he said. I've said everything I can, whether you hate me or not, whether you hold on to the war or let it go. That's up to you. She stared at him, her mind racing. And if I choose to hate you? He met her gaze, unflinching. Then I'll accept that. The door hissed open, and he stepped toward it. Alric, she said suddenly, the name tasting strange on her tongue. He paused but didn't turn. If I wanted to leave this behind, if I wanted something more, how would I start? He turned then, his dark eyes meeting hers with a quiet intensity. By deciding that who you were doesn't have to define who you are. The door slid shut, leaving her alone. Lykara sat in the silence, her thoughts a storm of conflicting emotions. She looked down at the book in her lap, its pages filled with stories of a past she had never known. For so long, she had believed the war was all there was. That hatred and survival were all she could hope for. But now, for the first time, she saw a different path. It wasn't easy. It wasn't simple, but it was hers to choose. Slowly, she rose to her feet, the chains around her wrists clinking softly. She walked to the door, her heart pounding. I'm ready, she said aloud, her voice steady. The door hissed open, and for the first time, Lykara stepped into the light. The end.